So, Iowa. Land of corn, the field of dreams, and, as it turns out, a bit of an economic ouchie for its renewable fuels industry in 2024. We're talking about a staggering $800 million less pumped into the state's economy compared to the previous year. Yes, you heard that right, $800 million. That's not just a dip. That's like finding out your prize-winning pig isn't just sick, it's also been secretly investing in meme stocks and lost it all. This isn't some minor blip on the radar, it's a significant financial gut punch for a state that prides itself on feeding and fueling the nation, or at least parts of it, with corn juice for your car. The alarm bells aren't just ringing, they're playing a rather depressing polka, and frankly no one wants to hear that. And why this sudden financial headache, you ask? Well, the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, or IRFA, which sounds like a very serious group that probably has extremely strong opinions on the correct way to butter corn on the cob, points a rather accusatory finger at stagnant corn demand. Apparently people, or rather engines, aren't guzzling down as much corn-derived fuel as they used to, or at least the anticipated growth has hit a significant wall. Compounding this issue, corn prices themselves have been doing a rather sad imitation of a deflated bouncy castle for the past 2 years, with forecasts suggesting they'll continue their downward trajectory into the 2024 to 2025 crop year. It's a classic case of too much corn, not enough cars thirsty for its fermented goodness, or perhaps just too many other, more appealing options on the market. Now, numbers on a spreadsheet are one thing, but this economic downturn has a very real, very human cost. We're talking about jobs, folks. In 2023, the industry was supporting over 52,000 direct and indirect jobs in Iowa. Fast forward to 2024, and that number has plummeted to just over 34,000. That's a loss of around 18,000 jobs. Think about that for a moment. It's not just a few construction projects wrapping up or a single facility closing its doors, though those are certainly part of the unfortunate equation. The real kicker, according to people who spend their days analyzing these things, like IRFA's Executive Director Monte Shaw, is the insidious indirect impact. As he rather bluntly put it, when farmers don't have money, they're not out buying new equipment. That is where those job losses have happened. It's a domino effect, and the last domino is often someone's livelihood, their ability to pay the mortgage or plan for the future. Despite this rather gloomy picture, let's not write off Iowa's ethanol industry just yet, because that would be too simple, wouldn't it? It still managed to contribute a hefty $5.7 billion to Iowa's gross domestic product in 2024, accounting for about 2% of the total state output. And bless their determined hearts, Iowa's ethanol plants still churned out a mind-boggling 4.6 billion gallons of ethanol in 2024, keeping the state firmly in the lead for national production by a significant margin. So, they're still making an awful lot of the stuff, it's just that making a lot of it isn't quite translating into the booming economic bonanza it once was. It's like being the world's leading producer of fidget spinners in 2025. Impressive production numbers, sure, but the market's looking a bit peaky, isn't it? So, with the traditional ethanol market looking a bit wobbly, like a scarecrow after a particularly aggressive hailstorm, what's the grand plan? What's the brilliant strategy to pull this industry back from the brink? Well, according to Monte Shaw, the aforementioned executive director of IRFA, the golden ticket, the most cost-effective and impactful tool no less, is to boldly go where Iowa ethanol has not gone before: ultra-low carbon ethanol markets. We're not just talking about putting slightly greener fuel in your slightly dented sedan anymore. No, think bigger. Think sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, powering actual aeroplanes. Imagine soaring through the sky, fueled by corn. Plus, there are potential markets for fuels for the marine industry, trains, and even some heavy-duty construction and agricultural equipment. It's ambitious, it's futuristic, and it's apparently where the real money might be hiding. Another arrow in the quiver, or perhaps another kernel in the silo if we're sticking with the corn theme, is the relentless push for nationwide year-round E15. Now, for those not fluent in the thrilling dialect of fuel speak, E15 is a blend of gasoline with 15% ethanol, a modest step up from the more common E10 that most people use. The industry has been clamoring for this for ages, arguing that if E15 were available all year, across the entire country without those pesky seasonal restrictions, it would significantly boost demand for their product. And the numbers bandied about are quite something. Studies from the National Corn Growers Association suggest that this single move alone could ramp up corn demand by a staggering 2.3 billion bushels annually. That's an awful lot of corn, even by Iowa standards, and could be a desperately needed lifeline for those falling prices we talked about earlier. And let's be honest, focusing on domestic demand like E15 makes a whole lot of sense, especially when you consider the often unpredictable and frankly chaotic world of international trade. Ryan Sauer, who holds the rather important-sounding title of Vice President of Market Development for the Iowa Corn Growers Association, basically said that if corn export markets get slapped with tariffs, which, let's face it, happens more often than anyone would like, having a robust home market for your corn-turned fuel is pretty crucial for stability. He even threw out a rather chilling warning: if the current delightful cocktail of stagnant commodity prices and painfully high input costs continues without new markets opening up, Iowa could be staring down the barrel of something resembling the devastating 1980s farm crisis. And nobody, absolutely nobody, wants a sequel to that particular horror show. It's fundamentally important to remember just how deeply intertwined Iowa's agriculture is with its ethanol production. A whopping 62% of all corn grown in Iowa gets processed by the ethanol industry. That's nearly 2/3 of the state's signature crop. So when the ethanol industry sneezes, the entire corn-growing community doesn't just catch a cold, it potentially faces a severe case of the financial blahs, if not outright pneumonia. And yet, amidst all this economic turmoil and uncertainty, the IRFA was quick to point out that the direct impacts of biofuels within Iowa remain strong. In fact, they apparently hit another record for fuel production in 2024. So, the plants are humming, the ethanol is flowing, but the big multi-billion-dollar question is, can they find enough profitable places for it all to go before something gives? Now, to unlock these fancy new ultra-low carbon markets, especially the sustainable aviation fuel everyone's so incredibly keen on, there's a bit of a catch. There's always a catch, isn't there? Ethanol producers need to significantly lower the carbon intensity of their production process, and one of the big, bold ideas for doing this is something called carbon capture and sequestration, or CCS. The plan, in very simple terms, is to capture the vast amounts of carbon dioxide produced during ethanol fermentation, and it is a lot, and then bury it deep underground, ostensibly forever. Monte Shaw, our friend from IRFA, is a huge proponent, arguing that CCS could unlock tens of billions of gallons of additional biofuel demand over the next 2 decades. It's presented as the key, the magic wand, the technological silver bullet that will save the day. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Especially when you're talking about giant industrial projects and extensive networks of pipelines. These CCS projects, most notably the highly controversial Summit Carbon Solutions pipeline, are facing a veritable army of opposition. And it's not just a few disgruntled individuals. We're talking landowners who are, to put it mildly, not thrilled about the idea of a high-pressure CO2 pipeline running through their property, potentially impacting their land values and safety. We have some politicians who are raising serious red flags, and environmental groups like the Sierra Club and Bold Alliance who are screaming from the rooftops about the potential dangers. Their concerns? Oh, just little things like safety, the unsettling memory of past pipeline ruptures. Hello, Mississippi, we see you. And the rather thorny issue of companies potentially using eminent domain to seize private land for these pipelines. Minor details, really, if you're not the one whose land is being targeted. The path for these CCS pipelines is proving to be less of a smooth superhighway to a greener future, and more of an incredibly challenging obstacle course designed by a particularly sadistic game show host. For instance, the Iowa House actually voted to ban the use of eminent domain for carbon sequestration pipelines, which is a bit like telling a vampire he can't use his fangs, a significant impediment to their business model. Summit Carbon Solutions, often seen as the poster child for these ambitious projects, has reportedly secured easement agreements for over 75% of its initial pipeline route, which sounds impressive until you hear they're currently stalled. They're waiting for a permit approval in South Dakota, where their first attempt was unceremoniously denied after, you guessed it, a ban on using eminent domain for CO2 pipelines was enacted. They plan to reapply with a smaller project, which is a bit like saying, okay, you didn't like the giant scary pipeline, how about a slightly less giant, still quite scary one? And not everyone is convinced that these carbon capture pipelines are the definitive silver bullet the industry and its advocates claim them to be. Emma Schmidt, from Bold Alliance for example, argues that this unyielding commitment to carbon capture pipelines might actually be hindering the biofuels industry by sucking up all the oxygen and investment. Her point, and it's a fair one to consider, is that there might be other, perhaps less disruptive or contentious, ways to decarbonize ethanol production, other paths to that greener fuel, that aren't being adequately explored because everyone's so fixated on these massive controversial pipeline projects. It raises the critical question: is CCS the only viable way forward, or just the way some very powerful and well-funded entities want it to be? Food for thought, or perhaps fuel for thought, in this increasingly complex case. This debate is far from over, folks, and the answers are not simple. Now, if Iowa doesn't get its act together with these new technologies, particularly CCS, there's a very real and very worrying possibility looming on the horizon. Monte Shaw, never one to sugarcoat bad news, didn't mince his words when he warned that without CCS capabilities, Iowa could lose its coveted title as the most cost-effective place to turn corn into ethanol. And who's waiting in the wings, eagerly practicing their acceptance speech, ready to snatch that crown? None other than neighboring Nebraska, where a roughly 400-mile carbon dioxide sequestration pipeline is apparently chugging along and expected to be operational by the end of 2025. Imagine that. Iowa, the undisputed king of corn ethanol, potentially being out-corn ethanoled by Nebraska. The sheer indignity. It's like a Hawkeye suddenly deciding to become a Cornhusker fan, an unthinkable betrayal yet potentially on the horizon if things don't change, and fast. Despite the current economic storm clouds, which are looking rather dark and ominous, it's absolutely crucial to remember, as the IRFA keeps reminding everyone with increasing urgency, that the direct impact of biofuels within Iowa is still incredibly significant. This isn't some niche boutique industry run out of a shed, it's a cornerstone of the state's economy, deeply woven into its agricultural fabric and identity. Remember, they still managed to hit a record for fuel production in 2024. The plants are running, the jobs, though fewer than before, are still there providing for families, and the contribution to GDP, while down, is still measured in the billions of dollars. So, reports of its death would be greatly exaggerated, to paraphrase Mark Twain. The industry is bruised, yes, and facing serious headwinds, but it's far from being knocked out entirely. It just needs a new game plan, and perhaps a new playbook, very quickly. The message coming out of Iowa from farmers to industry leaders is loud and unequivocally clear. The status quo is not an option. Business as usual will lead to more of the same decline. To navigate these choppy economic waters and avoid a deeply painful repeat of past agricultural crises, there's an urgent, almost desperate need for those new markets we've discussed, particularly for ultra-low carbon ethanol that can command a premium. And to access those lucrative markets, innovation in technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, despite the considerable hurdles and vocal opposition, is seen by many within the industry as absolutely vital for future competitiveness. It's a high-stakes race against time, a race against falling commodity prices, and a challenging race against other states and even countries that are also eyeing the same green prizes. The pressure is truly immense, and the stakes for Iowa's farmers and its wider economy could not be higher than they are right now. This is not a drill, people. This is economic reality. So here we are, in the bright, shiny year of 2025, looking at Iowa's iconic ethanol industry, standing at a genuine, no-turning-back crossroads. One path leads towards potential revitalization, powered by new markets, cutting-edge and yes, still controversial technologies, and a renewed sense of purpose in a rapidly decarbonizing world. The other path? Well, it's a bit less sunny, a bit more depressing, potentially leading to further economic decline, more job losses, and a shrinking role for what has been a titan of American renewable energy for decades. Iowa must now perform a delicate and unenviable balancing act, supporting its agricultural heartland, addressing legitimate environmental and community concerns surrounding new infrastructure, and making bold, perhaps risky, bets on the future of fuel. The decisions made now, in the coming months and years, will determine whether Iowa's vast cornfields continue to power the future, or simply become a picturesque relic of a bygone era of biofuel boom and ambition. The clock is ticking.